on Tuesday, April the 13th. I want to welcome everybody here this afternoon for the Town Planning Board meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We've got a lot of business to cover tonight, so we're going to get started. If we all would stand, please, and do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so let's start off with a traditional order of business. I'd like to do a roll call just to determine who is here. So, Mr. Pringle, if we'll start with you, just do a simple roll call.
Yeah, Mark Bringle.
Ryan Nelms.
Ronald Fight.
Dale Udi.
Catherine Drum.
So we have our quorum for tonight. I thank everybody for coming out. We've got on item number 4, board announcements. I got a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. So if I could actually call on Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, I'm going to yield the floor to you, if you would, please.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Fight. Just as an announcement from a matter of business that happened last night at the Board of Aldermen meeting, officially we considered for appointment all of you 7 seating and Mr. Nelms as an alternate as a part of the Board of Adjustments. So I wanted to make sure that you were all aware of that, and so that we get our house in order from a procedural standpoint. So I just wanted to make that announcement official here for you all in your meeting tonight, and thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. And I'd also like to extend a thanks to the town board for their vote of confidence in this group. So we look forward to the challenge. Okay, are there any other board announcements that we need to discuss before we start? Okay, so let's move on to number 5, the approval amendment of the agenda. The only thing that I've got on here that's going to be additional will be under the area of number 8, new business. And we'll also have to determine a time for our next meeting, which has already been established, but we're going to review that based on what we talk about with the item 8A, which is the time change that we'll talk about. We did change our time when we actually went to this new structure that we were dealing with, 160D. Item number 6, approval of meeting minutes. As I have been reminded, we actually have 2 sets of meeting minutes to address, and that's going to go back to the March 9th, excuse me, not the March the 9th, the March 9th, March 23rd, and 25th. March the 9th would have actually been the meeting where we did not have a quorum, but just for the record, we need to state exactly what did transpire, so I believe everyone's got that. So do I have a motion to accept those meeting minutes?
Motion to accept.
The second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good. Okay, so the most minutes are now accepted. So number 7, old business. Mr. Flo, this is actually where I believe I'm going to yield the floor to you. We've had some conversations, but we're looking for your guidance tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and congratulations on your added role, if I may take this off for clarity in the microphone, on your added role for the Board of Adjustment. That's a different role for those of you who may or may not have a recollection of what that's about. Take a look at Article 4 in your new draft ordinance at some point. There's about 2 pages on the Board of Adjustment role, their duties, and things of that nature. It is a court-like body. The planning board is an advisory body, and it's good to have definition in your ordinance about them being separate boards, but they can be the same people. Okay, but it's a different role, different set of responsibilities. The Board of Adjustment is, like I say, kind of court-like, so pretty much everything that comes before you on the Board of Adjustment, other than maybe some training or what have you, would be quasi-judicial or court-like, which means that people that are offering opinions have to be qualified to offer those opinions. For example, it's evidentiary, as it's known. And don't let that scare you. If you have more than one case about every 2 or 3 years, you probably will be surprised. It's typically there as a protective measure for your citizens, to have someone to which to appeal. Any kind of unique situation that is really beyond their control, for variance, or even if there's a challenge to a staff member's decision, so that clarification by a board can be offered for that, rather than just debating whether they did a good job or didn't do a good job. You hear the evidence, you hear the facts, and then you determine, because sometimes you may have more than one way to interpret something, okay? And that's two of the roles. The third role is actually on what are referred to as special use permits in your ordinance, and those are covered in the middle of Article 7. A special use permit is for those of you that were here with the introduction of Article 8 that are referred to as the scary stuff. You know, if we don't cover that in our ordinance, the presumption is it's going to be rounded off and allowed somewhere. So we put in scary address process for approval. It might be like a incinerator, or who knows what that might mean, but it's not your stuff. A few years ago, we were using a special use in a subdivision. Well, that's wrong. You know, your new ordinance basically sets standards, and if the governing board, is ready for growth of a certain density, then they would zone the property such and let the ordinance do the talking. And so the special use permits are predominantly those pretty edgy, frightening concerns that people would have. So that's a quick backup and commentary, particularly for the new members, on the Board of Adjustment's role and how that fits. So, but Article 4, the second part of it, and Article 7 about special use permits, and then of course the piece about variances and appeals in Article 6 will tell you everything you ever needed to know about Board of Adjustment rules and roles and responsibilities. Okay? And your rules of procedure will guide you through conducting those meetings. It sets up agenda for you, everything, so that it's easy to follow. Okay?
Okay.
Now, with that said, basically there's a couple things I want to go back over. So I'm going to take a little bit of liberty and breeze across item number A1, the draft plan, very quickly. We presented that to you. We rolled that future land use map, which is the one on the right, out, which is kind of the vision for the future. Okay, it's looking kind of over the hill. Unfortunately, I don't like the way the maps come out now. They look like just like zoning maps, because they're very literal. In the old days, when we actually drew them by hand, we could make them kind of soft around the edges, so a piece of property could kind of go either way. A smaller piece of property might be, it could go either way. But computers can't think like that nor perform like that, so they're very literal, but they're generalized now, okay? That's why you'll see neighborhood in yellow over there, and over here you see several different categories on the zoning map of what fall under neighborhood, like single-family residential 1 or 2 or 3, okay? You follow me? So that's the role of the future land use map. That map and that document, which is in tab 25 of your notebook, are the reference materials for making big picture decisions. I'm just sort of recapping a little bit. That reference material for making big picture decisions is intended by the statutes to sort of pull you above of, well, you know, Amber's family's always been great. They've donated to the park and the Girl Scouts and everything else, and so we're going to approve their zoning request. And old Rick, he's that scoundrel that rides a bicycle and jumps through people's rose bushes and everything else. We're not going to approve it. You know, it's intended to bring you back to what are we looking at big picture wise in the community, not the finite aspect of who it is or something like that, which you should stay away from. The governing board can listen to the neighbors and say, okay, this is going to hurt, you know, Mr. Flo's, you know, situation there. We hear him loud and clear, and we hear the planning board loud and clear, and they have to make a decision. And that's not an easy task for them. But your role by statute is to provide that visionary recommendation, irregardless of sort of who the players are. What is the big picture? What is the best thing for the town? And then let them weigh all that, who's fussing and who's not, and and everything else. Okay, so about that, what that future use plan or comprehensive land use plan, that what we're calling Town Plan 2040 is all about. And here we have an example of a hardworking city manager. This is an example. We'll point to this one. Thank you for tackling that. My easel that was here last time went with Tom. That's why my car went with Tom. He's in Lowell, which is further away, so he got to take the easel in the car. He couldn't be here tonight. They're actually adopting their plan tonight. So that's the role of that document. It's also full of information about the demographics of the community, things of that nature. That might not really inform you much because it's really looking at sort of over your shoulder in the background. But when you're applying for funding, if the town were applying for funding to maybe expand or construct a park, like you did your park plan a couple of years ago, and Tom actually worked on that with Bob Clark. Whenever you submit grant applications, loan applications, maybe a building under the USDA lending, something like that. Maybe it's utilities, water, sewer, maybe it's EPA or state infrastructure grant funding or loan funding. They all look for, are you just out here throwing money around, or are you following something? Are you going by something? So it's a really about kind of that almost fiduciary responsibility of the taxpayers and ratepayers of the community, that you're making decisions and you're following some kind of guidance as you go forward. So that's how that plan plays into your and the council's role, and then staff would use it to actually submit with package on funding, because you get a few points for that, okay? You get a few points for having your act together, and that's how they separate the winners from the losers. You know, you don't have a plan, you don't really know where you're going, you just have this hot idea. That doesn't score as well as you've got something, you know, that you're trying to achieve, and it builds on each other, builds on itself. If there's any feedback on the draft of the map or the draft of the document, I'll be happy to address that. That's kind of where we are right now.
Any questions?
That's tab 25.
So I did have one question after reviewing the map over this past week, and it really just came down to, I don't know if it's when we're looking at Main Street going south, we have everything from this intersection all the way down as industry. The big purple box right there, yes. And my only concern was that we have that big lot of land where the ball field sits right now, and I would rather have it coded as mixed use or something that can bring a little bit more appeasing opportunities to Landis.
You bring up an excellent point, and I want to share with you a little bit. But to do that, I'm going to pull back for just a moment to the draft zoning map, which is not part of the plan; it's part of the ordinance. But there's a relationship here. The zoning map is kind of where you are, or either what's right around the immediate corner. The future land use is really what's down the road. When we craft the designations on these maps to make recommendations, there's a sequence that we follow, and this is very, very important for you as you deliberate these matters, because we will change anything that needs to be changed. I want to point out to where they come from, okay? The first thing that we look at, the very first thing that we look at is, what does the town's current zoning have zoned industrial? And the reason we go there first is because that is the one category that we do not want to trip up if you have been working with the State Department of Commerce on industrial recruitment, international job placement, things of that nature. The last thing we want to do is recommend, well, let's don't do that, and then we find out we just tripped up a deal that's highly confidential in Raleigh. So if we know more about it, then sure, you can sort of open that topic up and move back. But that's the reason that those two are like they are. We never yank the rug out from under a lot of those those discussions that may be going on. And I noticed as I came to the meeting tonight that that the signage for sale beside the park site indicates that that site is in a network of economic development and commerce development for the state of North Carolina. So before we backpedal
Yep.
on that, we really need to contemplate that. Now, the future land use map can call for it to go to mixed use, but the current zoning map should probably keep it there because of where it is. Okay, knowing that if industry doesn't bite on it, or over time industrial climate changes further and it's more tech-driven or more of some other nature, then you certainly haven't heard anything, because this is what they look at. They will look at your zoning on the property. If you feel that you would like to sort of set the stage for that to soften, if something doesn't bite on that site, then by all means, you could change to mixed use and things of that nature in there. Now, that's not your nasty heavy industry. For those of you that recall in Article 1, there is an overlay district, which is pointed out in the zoning map, that is required for any kind of heavy industry that is highly standardized. There are standards and specifications that are extensive on that. It requires another layer of zoning, an HIO overlay. It then requires a special use permit for the scary stuff. So most of the stuff that's in a standard industrial is going to be very clean and low impact. So I'm trying to give you a little bit of background on where that came from. Now I'm going to finish my dissertation on how we build these maps, because I think we've sort of opened that can of worms. The second thing we look at is nonprofit ownership, civic ownership. We look at schools, municipal properties, parks, churches, religious institutions of all types. And we categorize those over here as civic. Okay, so we take the industrial based on the zoning, we take the civic based on ownership, and we start with those two. Then we look at the character corridors, 29, Main Street, things like that. Then we look at the densities for residential. And that's how we back into this. And then we look at the vacant property, and we look at areas that are underutilized, and we try to identify best case scenarios for opportunity, with the exception of not changing the industrial without guidance from leadership. Okay? So that's a long answer, but I think it was an excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you for explaining that.
All right, if there are no changes to make, or if there are changes to make, the next item under the plan, this is still under 6A, 7A, would be to make a recommendation as written, or a recommendation with changes that you would direct, like the map discussion we just had, or something like that. And we can do those, and you can build that into your motion. And that motion would be for the purpose of recommending the draft plan to the Board of Aldermen for their consideration. That is the next step for you on the plan. If there are no changes, would be to send it up, because that plan needs to stay in front of the progress of the ordinance, of the actual development ordinance. Okay? There is a draft one-page ordinance that goes with that plan that just simply carries it into place. It's that little item, and I think we probably put that in tab 25 as, well, I don't see it there as well. Well, I know we had it up one night in here, but it's just a carrier ordinance that says the plan is hereby adopted type of thing. Okay? And that, we should have that in the record. You remember that thing the other night? Right. I don't have a copy of it. I think that we got them for everybody, though.
Is the paper that says whereas, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. That's,
It wasn't whole punch. I just split it.
here, I found out in the front of my book in general, and I can pass it around if anybody does not have this. Look at it. It is what I call a carrier ordinance. It just picks up this plan and carries it forward. And so you would be making a recommendation to the board to consider the adoption of Town Plan 2040. the proper term for that town plan is the 2040 Comprehensive Land Use Plan. Town of Landis, 2040 Comprehensive Land Use Plan, that's tab 25 in your notebooks.
Does anyone have any questions on this land use map before we proceed? Yes. Mayor Pro Tem, actually, I see a question mark.
I'll stay right here.
You want to say that?
Mr. Flo, this question will be directed to you, and just a point of clarity as well. For on the official zoning map that's currently in use, this map here to my left, could you maybe very high level describe the differences of single-family residential 1, 2, and 3, and the decision-making that goes in the process of determining those areas?
Absolutely. Very good question. The SFR districts, and if you're looking, now this is really, we're on the plan, I guess you're headed towards the plan. The single-family residential districts that are mentioned in the plan to be addressed in the ordinance are set with one simple factor in mind, and that is density. The listed uses in the ordinance, which we're not talking really about the ordinance right now, but the listed uses in the ordinance, in the development ordinance, are exactly the same, regardless of whether you're in an SFR 1 or 2 or 3. It is simply the lot size, lot width, and overall density of development.
Thank you.
So we use the existing patterns on the ground, the recorded property lines that day, to determine where areas are already developed, to determine whether they should be SFR 1 or 2 or 3.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, any other questions? Okay. So, Mr. Flo, are we at the point in time now where we need to make a motion to adopt?
Well, it is a critical necessity to keep the plan ahead, that's sort of the horse, ahead of the cart, to keep the horse or the ahead of the development ordinance, which is kind of the cart. So if you're not going to be sending the plan up at this time, I would also hold the ordinance back, because the governing board needs to be able to find, and there is a draft consistency statement that we will get to in a little while when we talk about the ordinance, that indicates that the ordinance is consistent with the values and components and the direction of the plan. In other words, you're going from where we are today to where we want to go tomorrow.
Yes.
So a motion would be a major step towards moving that along to the governing board, to the Board of Aldermen, so that they can consider that plan document.
Yeah. I think, and this is a personal observation on my behalf, but I think the future use land map, that's the part where I think probably the more time we have, the more we can get into the details of actually where we go. But I think that takes a lot more time than probably we have at this stage of the game. So,
You're required by statute to periodically update it, and the School of Government has interpreted, Adam Lovelady, the legal counsel for the School of Government, has interpreted because I asked the question maybe one day, I said, so in North Carolina, how are we going to interpret periodic? He said, well, fast growth areas about every 5 years at least. slow growth areas maybe every 10 years. So you're probably going to be working on that map forever,
Yes.
to always kind of keep it out ahead of on the horizon. So you'll always, at your planning board meetings, have an opportunity to contemplate, to study, to examine those areas and bring forward recommendations when you feel that they're warranted.
And now, as far as the map on the left, that represents what I'm going to call current state, for lack of a better choice.
This is the zoning, this is a page of the zoning ordinance, of the development ordinance. This is actually law of the land.
Yes.
That is vision, this is law of the land.
But that is, as far as technicality goes, that's what I call current, up-to-date. That would represent what we have right now.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure, without going, like you said last meeting, where you literally go out there and say, let's take this piece of property and see how it's actually zoned now, without going to that level of detail.
We don't look at the residential as to how it's zoned now, because what we found in your case here is that there was what I call kind of a one-size-fits-all zoning approach to a lot of your residential, and it was the R8
Yes.
category, which is it's a fairly high density, and it was used kind of across the board. Maybe it was perceived as being less restrictive or whatever the case may be, but it doesn't really fit with the variations of neighborhood character that you have. And that's why we have actually 4 primary residential districts, the SFR 1, 2, and 3, and also that transition district around the oldest parts of town where there were really no standards when that area developed. And so it's the one that's probably got the most flexibility built into it. So SFR 1, 2, and 3 are identical in uses, just different in densities and the numbers that drive density. And then the residential Main Street transition, which is really kind of transitioning from the center of town out into the areas, or a transitioning town. Helps you sort of transition over time, where houses might have been built without any regard for should there be a setback of any kind. So because we don't want to create nonconformities if we can help it.
Exactly. Okay, good. Okay, well, from my point of view, I think I've heard the details that I need to hear. I'm now looking to the board to ask for if we have a motion on the table.
Yes, I make a motion to recommend the Town of Landis Comprehensive Land Use Plan 2040 to the Board of Aldermen and the Governance Board.
Okay, so I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I second that.
Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that motion has been passed.
Congratulations, Planning Board. We will be scheduling rollout for the Governing Board at our earliest convenience, and I would like to invite any member of the Planning Board or members that may want to attend that presentation, because I think it means a lot to your elected officials to when you stand there and say, we worked on this and we recommend this, rather than just some lowly little planner like me saying it. So I'm going to suggest that when we do know that date, that maybe you could do that, which leads me to making a comment about item number 9. If you do decide you want to attend the Governing Board's meeting, instead of adjourning tonight, you can always continue to that night with the intent that you're not going to be taking any action other than the fact that a quorum may be present in making the recommendation or standing together to make the recommendation. Okay? If you wish, there will be nothing required of that, but I just think it means a lot to your elected officials to hear from you rather than just hearing from me.
Would this be at their next normally scheduled board meeting?
We
or-
are targeting the May meeting to roll everything out and set some work sessions, and they're going to probably have to pull some all-nighter. No, I'm just kidding.
They've already done that, I've heard a few times.
So, but that's the game plan right now.
Would that be May 10th by chance?
That's correct. May 10th meeting is when we hoping to get secured on the agenda and to be able to request a significant enough time to introduce these very important topics in detail.
May I add 6 p.m.?
Yeah, we're actually, I've got it on my agenda. We're going to be discussing our meeting time as well tonight. Yeah. So if we recess this meeting tonight, then we would be reconvening on May the 10th. Is that what I'm to understand?
That's six.
Okay.
And
So
you
that-
wouldn't even convene, you would just be, you're just cautioning the fact that you might have a quorum present, but that you don't intend to take on any business. You're not gonna come in and have a meeting and vote on anything. You're just gonna stand together and show your selves, show your presence, show your interest in the community's future.
Well, the reason that I'm asking, our next regular scheduled meeting is May 11th. So I'm trying to determine, do we still schedule our regular meeting?
That'll be up to you. If you want to take your vacation that night, you've deserved it. Sorry, I'm hinting that they're May 11th. There might be plenty to do, depending on this next item B,
Okay, let's
depending
talk.
on that one. There are a couple things I want to point out about the development ordinance. You should have received a replacement page for Article 4. It's pages 1 and 2. You'll notice in the paragraph near the bottom, the gray highlighting over planning board, we did something fairly unusual, which is an alternate on the planning board. And that's why when I brought that, I just copied the material from the Board of Adjustment and dropped it in up there, and I forgot to change the name up there because normally you don't see alternates on the planning board, but it's okay. The more you have, the merrier, really. And so that's why there was a typo there, and that highlight just indicates what the change was between that version and your previous version. That's all. In Article 1, there's a couple things that we've done on the first page to insert some of the dates of the repeal material and stuff like that as that comes together. So you'll see that on as you see Article 1 coming forward. We had Article 1 it enacts the new stuff, but it has to trash the old stuff at the same time. So we have some stuff that will be filled in as we get that. That's still being researched. So there's a couple of blanks on Article 1, page 1 in yellow highlight. But those will be completed as we near the finish line with the alderman on the actual effective date of the predecessor ordinances. That's not been easy to track down here in the town. And so we're working with staff to get that information, okay? The Article 20, something to just point out about Article 20. We had been kind of around and around. You may have a 1 or 2 page placeholder in there. There is going to be no new Article 20. We're going to simply incorporate the current stormwater design that's based on your town engineer's recommendation, West Webb with Allen, Farman and King, to not try to work on any amendments at this time. There's just too much going on. He's got a couple of ideas that he may want to share over the coming years with the town. But that stormwater engineering is largely what it is, engineering stuff. That it doesn't really change the character, changing the numbers. It might change some of the pipe sizes or something like that in the design. So we're just holding on to your current Article 20, and so that'll be dropped in the final version. We're not going to replace any Article 20 material. So that's just an update for you. There's no new material on Article 20 whatsoever. We're just taking it and dropping it in and calling it Article 20 to existing rules. Okay? But I wanted to point those out to you. We had distributed the tables, the zoning map, the technical standards manual, and a draft statement of consistency and reasonableness at a previous meeting. And I just want to make sure that if there were any questions about any of that, we've got the map up here on the wall. We don't have the projection set up tonight, but we've got the hard copy set up. So if there's any questions or anything like that on the zoning map, because this actually is a page of the ordinance, it just doesn't fit very well.
Board, do you have any questions? Okay. Okay, we're ready to proceed.
I have presented the chairman and the clerk with a couple of three draft language motions that I just sent over to somebody else earlier that was looking to do something that's doing something very similar to what you're doing. And so the wording is there, Mr. Chairman, if that helps. It's kind of a lengthy motion, but there are three. The first one is to recommend the ordinance with the map and the technical standards to the alderman. The second motion on this subject would be to recommend the draft statement of consistency, that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan that you just recommended under the previous motion. And then the third motion on this subject would be to recommend the draft rules of procedure for both the planning board and the board of adjustment to the governing board as well. So there's three motions, all kind of related. The general statutes now require that your rules of procedure be published and things of that nature. And on the website, if your ordinance is up there, the rules have to be up there. So you're showing people how you handle things.
Sure.
Okay? So I know that's a lot, but this is kind of the crescendo of your past few months.
Is this something we can do as a consent agenda, do all three motions at once, or do they have to be
I
separate?
would not recommend that.
Okay, all right.
Just reading the way the statute reads, it implies that the statement of consistency is a separate item.
Okay, all right,
So,
understood.
thank you.
Okay, so do I have a motion then to recommend this development ordinance to the mayor of the town board?
I have a motion to recommend the draft Landis development ordinance to the mayor and board of aldermen, along with its official zoning map and the draft technical standards and specifications manual.
So I have a motion, do I have a second? Second. We have a second? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can I
Yeah,
clarify who did the second?
Stephen Overcash.
Yeah. Any opposed? Okay, so the motion is passed. Okay. So the next motion we have deals with the statement of consistency and reasonableness. So maybe have a motion to approve that document.
I can make a motion, or I'll make a motion to recommend the draft statement of consistency and reasonableness for the adoption of the Landis development ordinance.
So I have a motion. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that motion is also passed. So I think our last one deals with the rules of procedure. Is that correct, Mr. Flood?
That is correct. There's two sets of rules of procedure for consideration by the governing board. And that would be one for you, the planning board, and one for the board of adjustment. And I bet y'all know the people on that board now.
We've met a time or two. I've heard of those folks. Not really sure of anything about them, but, we've heard. Okay, so this is actually a motion to recommend those rules of procedures that we've talked about on several occasions. So I'm looking for a motion to recommend those rules.
Make a motion to recommend the draft rules of procedure for the Landis Planning Board and rules of procedure for the Landis Board of Adjustment.
So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion is also passed. Okay.
Well, folks, I have thoroughly enjoyed working with you. I hate to say that, but I'm going to have to turn my attention to the governing board now. And I will be back at any time that I'm requested to assist with anything. And just to make you feel better, I'm going to let a little secret out. We're going to be presenting the Board of Aldermen with a certificate for 2 years of of administrative support on the new ordinance to make sure that we're able to answer questions and so that it's applied properly and to help build your staff's training and build your staff's comfort level with it, because it's considerably different than some of your older material. Okay? So we'll be in the background. I'll be there. If you need me, all you have to do is ask. Okay?
Okay. Very good. Is there anything that we need to sign to finalize this process? Or?
The town clerk will have you probably sign the statement of consistency document at some point, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
It would have your signature. It would also have, upon approval by the mayor and the Board of Aldermen, the mayor's signature, and then, of course, the clerk's signature. The mayor and the clerk will both sign Article 1, Page 1, when that document is completed and adopted. And then the clerk will sign the page 36 of Article 18, so that can be submitted back to the State Department of Public Safety upon that Landis Development Ordinance adoption, tentatively, I would guess, in June. So she may be chasing you down one day for a signature to go in the record. Yes, sir.
Okay.
But not while I'm up here.
Okay.
Not right now, if you don't need to, unless she's ready. Okay.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, we've got a couple of other items of business, but before we move off this topic, first off, I want to thank you. You've provided the water through the fire hose that we've been drinking from for quite a number of months now, but I appreciate all your help and your patience, because I know we've probably asked a lot of questions that probably seemed a little bit odd in terms of the type of questions, but it's us learning.
My hat is off. I have the highest level, my hat is off to you. I have the highest level of respect for volunteer board members, advisory board members who volunteer their time and get involved in their community. So I'm humbled to work for you. We in the profession call you the citizen planners. So
Okay.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the nice words.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, before we wrap up tonight, there's a couple of other items on the agenda that I would like to address before we call it a night. Under 8, item new business. If you'll recall, when we first started this journey, we were actually meeting, I'm not even sure, I think it was like 7 or 7:30. It was a rather late start. Since that time, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the town board has moved their meetings to the 6 o'clock time frame.
That's correct.
We had actually discussed, we took 5:30 for a variety of reasons. A lot of them had to do with the amount of work that was going to be involved. And we were trying to be as cognizant of that time frame as we could possibly be, and not sort of wear anyone out in terms of how much time we spent. But we've reached that point. So I would like to entertain a motion that we change our start time to 6 o'clock. Could I get a motion for that, please?
I'll make a motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I was hoping that one would pass. If it didn't, I thought I'd been really in big trouble. Okay, so tying that in, we've got one other, I think, something we've got to discuss, and that really is item 9 on the agenda. So we've talked about the adjourn or continue to the next time and date. Mr. Flo has actually presented a possibility of attending that presentation at the town board, and Mayor Pro Tem, Mr. Stewart, I'm asking, is that a reasonable supposition on our part that would be okay to attend, or is that something that you would need to just talk with the town board first?
I think that's a reasonable request and a show of solidarity.
Okay.
I don't see any personal issues with that from the standpoint of bringing the collective unison of the planning board to present or, face the governing board for your approval or anything to that nature. Likewise, if there's any opposition to it, I wouldn't be opposed to you as chairman presenting, making a presentation or comment or two for the governing board at the next regularly scheduled meeting.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. So I guess what I'm looking for some discussion among the board just for a moment, if you would, please, because there's really 2 things that I'm looking at in a motion here. One, we've already passed this issue of the 6 o'clock time frame, but the question is going to be in terms of attendance on May 10th, and we'll recess this meeting and reconvene on the 10th, or do we stay with our original May the 11th meeting? So I need to have some discussion before we can even vote on this thing. What's your pleasure?
Do we necessarily have to reconvene because we're not going to be taking any action, or do we just have to state that we are willing to come that we let the public know we're going to be as a body, but since we're taking no action, is it necessarily reconvening a meeting or just making the public aware that we are attending as a body?
Well, we certainly have to let the public know that there's, whether there is or is not a meeting on, say, the 10th or the 11th. So
Right.
they have that right to know.
Right. Now, I
The other
understand
question
about
is
the
going to be
11th,
if,
because that would be a meeting where we would take action.
yeah.
But
so-
on the 10th, we wouldn't necessarily be we're not meeting as a body to take action, so.
That's right. And Amber, you correct me if I'm wrong, but if we were to reconvene on the 10th, even though it's not a formal meeting from our standpoint, how does that affect your minutes of the meeting for that?
Yeah, I don't, to me, that'd be kind of weird because it'd be a meeting within a meeting.
Yeah.
You know, I think that, and my point of view is that it would just be like, you end tonight and you just agree that you're gonna present that.
So we would adjourn tonight then?
Yeah.
No, well, yes and no and yes.
That's clear.
What I'm suggesting is that you continue your meeting to that night solely for the reason that you may have a quorum present. So you're not all in here and you've not called that meeting, okay? But that your intent is not to take any action, and then all you gotta do, because if you want to, is just to show up, say a few words, and then you can look at each other and say, we're adjourned, we're done, and move on. And it can just be noted that you just spoke for the record, and then you can say into the microphone, and thank you very much, Mayor, members of the Board of Aldermen. The planning board is gonna adjourn now and excuse ourselves to go home. So that way it found its way into the public arena. Is that okay? Does that work for you? And then that way you can just show in the planning board's meeting minutes that they attended and, had a quorum present, attended a presentation, and then adjourned immediately thereafter.
So it's still going to be a recess for that meeting, but that's not, quote,
Right.
a full-fledged meeting at that
Right,
point.
right. The only time that it's really appropriate for you to be in a place at the same time is when it's purely incidental, like you just happened to all be at the Christmas parade, but you weren't necessarily together, but you were at the same event. That's when it's kind of incidental. But when you're coming into a meeting room like this and you knew about it, that's why I say err on the side of caution and let that go in the record as the fact that you had a quorum present, didn't take any action, adjourned after your presentation, and that was it. Okay.
Okay. So, again, I'm looking for the satisfaction of the board here. Does everyone agree?
Okay.
Okay. Can I get a motion on this just for the record? So we're actually going to recess this meeting, and we'll reconvene on the 10th. That also says we will not be having a meeting on the 11th. Motion for that?
Make a motion to recess this meeting and adjourn on the 10th at the board meeting, and we will not hold a meeting on May 11th.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Good deal. All right, so be it. And if I'm looking at my list right, if I remember when we first started this journey some months ago, that puts our next scheduled regular meeting on June the 8th, if my calendar is still right. But we'll send out something. And Amber, I think we have to do something publicly to let the public know that we will be moving our time and our change of our meeting, if you will. It's not a change of venue, but it's actually a change of date for that May 10th. All right. Gentlemen, ladies, it's been a pleasure working with you. I really appreciate everything. Any last comments before we adjourn? Okay, thank you, all of you very much for attending. Meeting is adjourned. Or recessed, I should say.
So much for not being on the record.
I know, right? He handed me a piece of paper, a script.
But you did so.
I work with them owns a lot in our district. They all receive this next week. It's a virtual meeting, but It's all
We're
rude.
still live. and-
We are.
He's on
We are,
vacation.
just until we get that cut off.
We see.
It's vacant. It's tonight, 6:30. He just sent it at 6:00. He sent it to me. With the 729 acres, free, yada, yada. And, I can shoot this to you. So you should- Oh, it's always there. Sure it is.
Yes, sir.
I work with a guy, and he knows a lot on the commodity side of those three. So,
Thank you so much.
yeah, I guess everybody would think.
Hey, great working with y'all. Hope to see y'all again sometime. Sorry I wore everybody out. Y'all are probably glad to see me go.
I've gotta say, thank you.
It's important stuff, and it's, you know, I'm getting paid to be here. You guys are the ones that I'm thanking, because you guys are the volunteers,